about user experience, user interface, and a little more detail specifically about mobile app design. So when it comes to mobile app design, like I said in a previous video about using the metaphor of Chick-fil-A, the very detailed, very simple mini tasks that involve the experience at Chick-fil-A is really similar to any kind of user experience on an interface as well. So even the smallest changes, whether it's, having one field for your first and last name rather than two, or having a checkbox just slightly larger so that people can click on it, those little things make up a huge collection of ideas that help the user have a good experience. So here's an example. I'm just going to show you a few case scenarios when it comes to improving user experience, and you can use some of these ideas to help out when you are improving a mobile app of your choice in your redesign. So you can see here on the very left there is a create an account, and you can see there's like a progress bar, which seems to be not really helpful, which they've changed to just another block there behind the white screen. And then the biggest change is just being consistent with the colors. So all logos like Google and Facebook, they usually give you some black and white versions as well. So making those buttons consistent, you'll see that they're the same size as the button above it, which is the action item. So you'll also notice that the action item is the brightest color. In Interactive Media 1, I talk about action items being bold and easy to find, because those are the action items that you are directing your audience to look at or to click or to interact with. Here's another example of just some really subtle differences that make a huge difference. So the biggest difference is that the photo is different. In my in-person class, we kind of talk through all of these, but I'll talk through them for you and just give you some questions to ask yourself while you're looking at these. So again, I'm just going to kind of give the answers in this next one, and I'll ask the questions for the other. I believe I have about 15 different case scenarios for you to look at. So the picture is the largest difference. You see someone's face and she's smiling versus just someone's hands, which isn't bad, but gives a little more personality. The photo is much darker. I can tell that someone used Photoshop to put a very minimal gradient there starting on her hand so that the white letters would show up better. And Start Learning from Anywhere is much larger, so easier to read. You have to consider that a lot of these app designs could be on some old iPhones or some smaller smartphones, and so the text appears much smaller. And you have to keep that in mind whenever you create buttons too, because being accurate at pushing something super small can be really difficult depending on the device. And then also you'll see that they added their branding there at the top left to give it more of a customized look and to understand, what they're a part of. So here's some questions. What kind of changes were made from the left to the right? So kind of like, those little kid puzzles where you see what's the differences in the picture kind of thing, or the question for each one of these. So some obvious answers you'll be able to answer for yourself, but sometimes some of these take a little bit more work to look at. For example, where it says get started is changed to create account. That makes more sense with this app. And the welcome message is much larger. So what differences does it make to have a white background versus no background? How does that change the design and the overall experience of this app, where the buttons are on top rather than part of a frame You can see on the left it looks more like a window, and everything is outside of that window, so there isn't much cohesiveness between the photo and what the text is saying. It kind of feels a little bit separated. But when you have the name fashion in the subtitle, and it's not just above it, but it is on top of the image, it feels more married and more part of a cohesive design. And then also the button that says login on the right has changed from already a member login. This just kind of helps with some redundancy. There's no reason to say, are you a member? ? When you could just simply say login. Here are some very subtle differences. So the image is the same, but you'll see that from left to right, some of the information is a little bit different. So what information here is different and why? So part of, understanding good UX design isn't necessarily to say, well, this is better and this is not so good, but more so telling or communicating and having the vocabulary to know why, like why these changes are made and what changes to make. So why is the information above the headline different than the bar at the bottom? So here's some more specific changes from UX UI design. So here before, you just have letters that are underlined or words that are underlined, and after you have more of a button and a little bit more bold look to it. And this is kind of a big difference between Web 1.0 and today. So the before message, or the before text, is more of an archaic way of doing things. It's the default. It's when you're coding, this is what it looks like. It's this blue color with the underline, and after seems more thought out. Another before and after, you can see here on the right, there are more illustrations and less text to read and more options to read more detailed information there on the right with the blue button. Again, on the right, you have more of a branding, more of a style, whereas on the left, you just have black and white, which isn't necessarily bad, but it just gives more personality. And then instead of having two boxes, they include everything into one. So including the currency within the number. Same here, you have some kind of boring black and white boxes that aren't necessarily bad, but one UX decision for this one is to prioritize. So you could see that all of the buttons at the top are pretty much remain the same. There's not any kind of distinction between all of the four, but in that after, you can see that the designer has determined that the button Save Changes is the most important, and the other three are a little bit grayed out just to eliminate somebody accidentally hitting clear, maybe. That might be devastating to accidentally hit that, or revert changes, and to direct the user to click on what is most likely going to be their choice. This is an example of how just simple hierarchy, text hierarchy, can really make a big difference and organize your eye better. So before, you have the same font and the same weight, except for the word total and totals at the top, which is also a little bit redundant. And then on the right, you have different weights, different colors, different sizes, to help the reader prioritize what is the most important information and how to categorize each section. Again, here we're just simplifying, going from having a really small profile picture that's a little bit difficult to see with a lot of information, to over on the right where you have simple information and a still imagine in a way to see this information about this girl Teresa, but a little bit easier way to see her profile right away. Again, similar to this one, you have a hierarchy of information using color and that little bar there in the middle to separate the two sections. Here, instead of having just the typical blue link, someone created more of an advertisement for upgrading their plan. Makes it a little more exciting and a little bit easier to want to click on. Here you have a menu of items, and I've seen a lot of these kind of menus in the mobile app design in Interactive Media 1. But if you really want to upgrade, something that everyone sees often, you can upgrade your menu to a drop down. So you can see instead of having 4 options there, likely among other options, you have a button that says create product and then some different colors to go with each section, as well as illustrations. Again, similar to the save changes, they prioritized, instead of having 6 items to choose from, they want you to pay the invoice. Does that make sense? And if you want to do any other action, there's the option to click on more, and the other 5 are listed there. Again, just making things a little bit clearer and easier to read. So having sort of a template and a style to something as boring as an account number and a balance is helpful. Here, instead of having a, just click here to add a new task, they have included an instructional video to give you an idea of what all the options are within this app and how to customize each task. A lot of times, probably a big trend within UX UI design, especially with apps, is to remember that people aren't clicking with a mouse, they're clicking with their finger. And so having a very clear button that is a good size is always a better idea within mobile apps, because it's easier to touch and to be accurate with. Before and then after here is just simply just minimizing some of the options, having some clear priority with the options, as well as adding and some updating information, so automated saving information. So I'm going to move on to some UX UI trends, especially, even within like fashion. Of course, fashion, there are always trends, and just like fashion, we have a lot of trends within design as well. So I'm just kind of going to go over what are the new 2023 upcoming, as well as upcoming trends that you guys should be aware of. So the first are emojis. Emojis are everywhere, it seems like. We've all become very familiar with emojis. Some more vivid 90s kind of colors, as well as more of like a bitmap kind of design. You can see here on the right, it's an example where you have the very flat, high contrast, like 8-bit kind of look. Another trend is having some animations within the apps. So these little guys here, I'm sorry I didn't save this correctly, but they are just kind of hovering or bouncing. So there's like some slight movement. Another trend is called brutalism. Brutalism is influenced by 1950s architecture, and most of the design, some of the designs within brutalism uses serif fonts, which you can see here. Just a review, serif fonts have the little brackets at the ends of each letters and look more traditional. And because the screen, it that kind of font isn't as readable. Usually in this kind of style, you'll see much larger fonts. And here's another example of brutalism. We can see the high contrast, but kind of going back to this 90s, very limited kind of design elements where you have less gradients and more of a flat look, as well as some really limited colors like just black and white. Another trend is using different weights within fonts. So here, this app is using Helvetica and utilizing the artboard of the screen using negative space. You can see here on the right. And continuing to be a trend is just adding any kind of social media, kind of an embed to each app and website is a really trendy thing that people are doing. Here's another example of animations and adding more interactivity. Another big trend that has continued is the use of AI. So AI referring to artificial intelligence that is incorporated in many apps, including this one is a screenshot of Spotify. So depending on which songs you listen to, collects data from each person. It collects the data of like how long you listen to the song, how often, what time of day. So much data that will help determine what other music that you might enjoy. And it's also it's mostly used in consumer experiences. So one thing that the part of this class that I want to talk about is referring to some articles from Wired Magazine. I have a subscription, and I just like to talk about current things that are happening. So TikTok, for the last few years, has been threatened to be banned in the U.S. And there's an article in Wired that I'll include a link to for you guys to read, but on your own, not required, but just something that might be interesting to you is it's really affecting higher ed in terms of professors embedding TikTok instructional videos, really anything that's on TikTok for instruction purposes, for connectivity, and for research as well. Another article that I chose that I thought was interesting was about VR and just where is it going and is it really becoming a big thing or not. Again, I'll link the article there. And also emotional AI. So the medical and education field is seeing more and more of emotional AI, meaning the robots can pick up whether you're sad or happy and understand how to respond to you. Kind of think of like Baymax from I'm just going blank on the movie, Big Hero 6. So, it's the emotional, and there's a lot of evidence that emotional AI just cannot keep up with human empathy. And so there's an article about those findings as well. So your very first step for this first project that's worth 10% of your grade is to create an empathy map. So an empathy, one of the very first things that you do when you design really anything that someone else besides yourself will use is to create a map of who kind of the likely user that will be using, in this case, the mobile app. And so narrowing down your audience and kind of giving a persona, which we'll also do a persona. But here, I want you to think about what user will use the choice app that you are redesigning. So this assignment, you can choose any app that maybe you would use or someone else would use and just needs a little uplift. And like I showed, this is not necessarily a redesign, a major overhaul. It doesn't have to be. A lot of my students will choose an app that really needs an overhaul. But so think about who that user would be and what they say, think, do, and feel. based around the problem that they are trying to solve with the app. So here's an example of a completed empathy map. You guys can, I suggest using InDesign. I think that would be the easiest, but I support you creating this in any shape or form, even physically. You can paint it, draw it. You can use Illustrator, Photoshop. You can use anything as long as it gets the idea across. So for this empathy map example, the user is Jamie, and this is what he or she says, thinks, does, and feels when it comes to buying a TV. So this is probably not necessarily an app scenario, but if you did have an app that sold TVs, these are kind of the things that this user would be assumed would say, think, do, and feel. So create that map first, and then we'll move on to the persona profile.